Well, hi everyone. Thanks for being here today. So for years the industry has talked a lot about institutional adoption, and today we're finally seeing that real deployment happen. But we also kind of need like a reality check on what it takes to scale. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it with you today, Tomer. You know, let's start immediately with where are institutions actually engaging in blockchains today, and what makes them hesitant to scale meaningfully, like in terms of volume on chain.
Yeah, sure. So, hey, good to be here with you. Hey, everyone, thanks for sticking around. So, I think the biggest thing we're seeing right now is that institutions are in. It's not. It's no longer a question of like when and whether. Like they're here right now, and so the question is how it scales. Stellar was built originally as an effort for cross-border payments. We're still seeing payments as a major use case for blockchains. We're seeing on Stellar 75% year over year increase both in velocity and in volume of payments. But in terms of what's happening right now with institutions, I think tokenization is a really big thing that we're seeing. This time last year, there was around $500 million TVL of RWS, real world assets tokenized on Stellar. Today, we're approaching $3 billion, so that's 6x, sixfold. It is insane. We've blown through every projection that we had for tokenization, and so I think that's really big. But like one thing and one little stat that's really exciting to me is that even though Stellar has been around for 12 years, since 2014, we had an increase of 85% year over year of developers in the Stellar ecosystem. Now, Stellar 12-year-old blockchain, some call us Dino chain, where I accept that definition. But the fastest growing blockchain ecosystem today is this 12-year-old Dino chain.
Oh, well, actually, before we move on, and I'd love that you brought up tokenization because I do want to ask about that in a little bit. But what gives the fastest growing, especially since you're calling yourself a Dino chain?
Well, I think the fact that the industry has finally focused on the things that I think matter the most, which is myself and Stellar, which is everyday financial services. And we've kind of like moved away from a lot of the distractions, NFT meme coins and various shenanigans. And we're finally, the entire industry is zoomed in on everyday financial services, and Stellar has been building up this infrastructure for finance for the past 12 years. We have a set of interoperable on and off ramps around the world. Stellar is one of the most accessible networks out there. You can go into any of 400,000 MoneyGram agents and go to from Stellar USDC. So Stellar really has the building blocks, and we also have the ecosystem, and we launched a new smart contracts platform 2 years ago, which is gaining more and more traction. It's kind of like brought a lot of builders to the ecosystem because there's a new DeFi ecosystem. So it's just a very exciting place to be at, even though we've been around the block a few times.
Well, I find this a very timely conversation we're having because it seems like there's been a lot of announcements around institutions and the Stellar network. And so I first wanted to ask about the DTCC announcement that Stellar will be its first public network integrated. And, what gives? Like, why? What does that decision tell us about what an institution like DTCC needs or values when they look for protocols?
Yeah, so DTCC is kind of like the clearinghouse of the US. Basically, every trade that happens in the United States goes through DTCC. So we're talking about a yearly volume that measures at like quadrillions. Okay, this is a lot of money, and so DTCC are doing the right thing and looking to tokenize on public chains. They started with Stellar because honestly, like I mentioned before, we have the institutional track record. We have an uptime, which is amazing in the world of blockchain. We have we have the rails, which are kind of like the building blocks in the infrastructure, and we also have we've worked with these teams for a lot of times, right? So it takes time, especially in the world of traditional finance, to get the trust of these institutions and these companies. DTCC specifically, they bought a team called Securency. We've been working with Securency since 2018, and so we have like a good amount of rapport with that team, and that's important for getting these type of projects off the ground.
I feel like privacy is also a big sort of component in all of this. And so when you guys are dealing with institutions, you know, I'm sure they're talking about that it's a major concern, but also a need. And so how is Stellar thinking about that while preserving as well, like trust and compliance?
Yeah, so I think, you know, there is definitely a glass ceiling to what we as an industry can accomplish without having very clear privacy solutions. It doesn't make sense to have a payroll solution that's built on a completely transparent system. It doesn't make sense to have like a merchant payment solution. You can't have your competitors see all of your flows and all of your competitors and your relationships. So that's definitely something that we need to solve for. I think one thing, and by the way, privacy is something that has been talked a lot about in the world of blockchain for, you know, probably the better part of like a decade. Zcash launched in 2016. It's a great project. I love it. But I think that historically we've talked about privacy in the context of kind of like this all or nothing cypherpunk version of privacy, which is great in some situations, but in a world in which regulated financial institutions need to work, and you need to have like selective disclosures or sometimes non-selective disclosures, like you need to have a more, I would say, nuanced system. And so, and these systems look differently between use cases. They look differently between jurisdictions, and they look differently between technologies. And so, what we're trying to do at Stellar is we take a building blocks based approach and a transparency first approach. So we do believe that it's important for the core L1 Stellar to stay transparent. We don't want to negate all the benefits of a public blockchain when we introduce transparency, because when we talk with these asset issuers, they are, you know, they go to block explorers, they see what's going on with their assets, they're excited about that. We don't want to take that verifiability, openness, transparency away from them, but we do want to enable builders to build private applications on top of them. So what we do is on the L1 itself, we introduce building blocks. Today, it's mostly around zero-knowledge cryptography, which is, I would say, the leading tech for privacy these days. And then we allow builders to come in and build solutions on top of that. So we have things like Stellar Private Payments that the Nethermind team has built. We have confidential payments or confidential tokens coming from Open Zeppelin. Boundless are building on Stellar. And so we have a lot of these different solutions that are getting built. Some of them have different privacy guarantees. Some of them just obfuscate you know, amounts of payments. Some of them also anonymize payments. And so it really depends on the right use case.
Right. Well, you know, I do want to jump back into like the array of news that's been going on around Stellar. And earlier this week, MoneyGram had announced that they're launching the MGUSD. Is that the right way to say it? Okay, MGUSD stablecoin on Stellar. So yeah, what does that tell us about like where institutions are headed and like why stablecoins are becoming so central to the payment stack?
So I think what it tells us is that institutions are finally serious about it. Because when an institution is issuing their own stablecoin, what they're saying is, you know, until now we've been, you know, fucking around with small amounts of money, right? And so when you have a small amount of you know, USDC or whatever stablecoin on your balance sheet, you know, no one cares about that, right? But when these numbers grow, you're starting to think, okay, I have like, you know, money on the balance sheet that it's not actually working for me. And so when an issuer, so when an institution says we want to issue our own stablecoin, it means that they are ramping up adoption of stablecoins. And stablecoins, at the end of the day, in this universe of everyday financial services, stablecoins are kind of like, you know, the cash of this universe. They're the checking account of this universe. And so they are kind of like the base for everything.
Right. How does Cap 77, the quorum freeze, like tie into all this? Like, can you explain that maybe to a non-technical audience and where it sort of fits in you know, institutional adoption?
Yeah, so you know, this goes into the question of security, which is a lot of institutions are coming on board. You know, they kind of like in the world of blockchain, we like to say about systems that they are you know, trustless. Trustless is a really terrible word to use. Please don't use the word trustless when you talk with institutions, because they're looking for someone to trust, right? And so I think that we're seeing a bit of a security apocalypse, happening right now across the entire cybersecurity space, but also in blockchains. And we want to make sure that we protect projects and users as much as possible. And so the specific protocol that you mentioned, Quorum Freeze, Cap77, is basically a way to allow for validators on the Stellar network to freeze balances on demand in case there's an ongoing hack. Now, this is something that we've been seeing happen a lot in the in the past few years. We had, Sui and the Setos hack last year. We had the Balancer hack, which had like multiple blockchains freeze balances. But the problem that we had, and we recently had the layer 0 Kelp DAO attack that led to the Arbitrum Security Council actually freezing a bunch of funds there. And so the reality is that the tech allows for some form of governance to take action. But unfortunately, we've done a poor job historically with making it clear what are the processes for making that happen, both from a technical perspective and from a governance perspective. So this specific change in the Stellar protocol gives the validators of the network, which are the effectively the governance body of the network, an authority to, if there's an ongoing situation, to temporarily freeze balances so that we can handle some of these security issues that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, that's you tie it in so nicely, because I was going to ask about the DeFi exploits of last month, or I guess it's June now, so April, which I think at some point someone said it was the worst number of like
worst month
ever in terms of DeFi hacks. And so I find that to be an interesting time period, especially as institutions are coming more and more on chain, and they start to see things like that. And so, like, what kind of safeguards do not just like Stellar, but other blockchains need to take into consideration, and institutions, what do they need to think about in terms of alleviating episodes or mitigating something like this? So.
Yeah, so I think it's worth not spreading panic right now, because we are seeing a lot of this in Web3, and the reason why we're seeing more of this in Web3 than we are in kind of like Web2 and other fintechs is just because Web3 is so transparent in its core, right? So everyone can see that something is happening. The reality is, your banks are not going to tell you about this, but hacks happen all the time, and they're also seeing a surge right now. We're seeing a surge because AI-assisted hacking has become more dominant, and our friends in North Korea have been getting really good at it. And so security is there's no security is not kind of like a yes, no, black or white, right? It's we like to think about security as security in depth, which means that you want to have as many layers of security as possible. And so at the Stellar ecosystem, we've been putting an emphasis on security for a while. We actually started when we launched our smart contracts platform a couple of years ago. We also launched an audit bank program. The audit bank is basically this sponsorship service to, if you are a DeFi protocol that is launching on Stellar, SDF will actually hook you up with a reputable auditor to get audited. We also have been collaborating and continue to collaborate with some of the biggest name in security, whether it's Blockade or Hypernative or Certora, which provide formal verification for smart contracts. We think that formal verification is a really important building block in the world of security moving forward, because what we're seeing with AI-assisted hacking right now is that basically anything that can be hacked will be hacked, and we need to do a better job in kind of hermetically sealing our smart contracts. And finally, one interesting thing about this wave of hacks that we've seen recently is that they're not actually code issues. They're more about kind of the SecOps. So, North Korea will get to someone in your organization. Maybe it's through kind of falsely advertising a job, and they get you to install something on your computer. And we're seeing a lot of these kind of long game style cons that are happening in the crypto ecosystem, and these are what are leading to actually kind of like some of the biggest hacks. And so we really need to up the SecOps game in the ecosystem. We've actually collaborated and are collaborating with Blockade, one of the leading security experts in the space, in order to provide this service for Stellar projects. And we're about to announce a few more projects in that space.
That's cool. Well, I'm getting towards the end of our conversation, and I did say that I wanted to get back to tokenization, and it feels like it's become one of the biggest buzzwords of the industry. But I wanted to hear your take if there's actually genuine attraction, or is this all just like another hype cycle?
I think it's somewhere in between. And so we are seeing a lot of RWAs being issued, and I think that like the evidence is undeniable. Like the numbers are huge. I think that we're also seeing them becoming more and more usable. So if last year or a couple of years ago you would have asked me what's the landscape of RWAs, I would have told you it's getting better, but they're not that usable. And when I say usable, I mean, if there's an asset that all it does, if a company is just kind of like tokenizing and by taking, creating like a row in a database and just kind of like doing nothing with it, that's not really interesting. The power of blockchain, the power of DeFi is in interoperability. And so we want to make sure that these assets are usable across the spectrum. We are seeing a lot of companies that are coming to the table right now, and they're taking assets that were initially issued in like a very closed loop, a very restricted way, and allow themselves to be more interoperable with other DeFi protocols, with other wallets. And so we're seeing like an opening up there. I do think that one big issue that we have right now with RWAs is distribution. So we're seeing a lot of tokenization. That means that there's a lot of supply, but we haven't seen that met with demand yet. That is, who is actually purchasing these tokens, who is actually holding them. We're seeing Stellar historically has been very strong with upcoming regions like Latin America and Africa, and we're definitely seeing users that are holding some of these assets in a way that allows them to get access to a form of like high yield savings accounts. But that's still small numbers. I think we are seeing some big institutions put like big numbers there, and that's encouraging. Probably the most promising layer is around small, medium businesses around the world. We're actually seeing a lot of adoption right now in Europe for assets that are RWAs that are issued on Stellar, because it gives these SMBs access to the type of financial instruments that they don't usually have access to. And this is all happening on the back end. On the front end, they actually have no idea that they're using blockchain at all, which is awesome.
Well, you gave me 1 second left, so I guess that's it. But thank you so much for your time today and for such an interesting conversation. So yeah, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.